Quick intro, I'm going to be reviewing a little exchange between Destiny and one of the guys from Ask Yourself's Discord. This guy knows some philosophy. I've debated him. He's smart. He's a good faith interlocutor. And I think he got the best of Destiny here, so it's going to be some fun to pick apart.
All right, Destiny. So real quick, I just want to say that I have a proposition I want to debate you on. The claim is that I disagree with, I think, a rhetorical point you were making in the first anti-Trump tour, ironically with Jake Var. So Jake Var claimed that he thinks the Democratic Party is a cult. You responded by asking him a question. You asked him a question. You said, okay, who is our cult leader? And then he responded by saying, I don't know. And then you responded by asking him a question, and the question was, well, isn't that kind of important? So I took that to be a rhetorical question. Okay, I took it to be that your point there was that it's important to know the cult leader if you're going to claim a group as a cult. And I disagree with that proposition, so I would take the negation of that proposition. So it's not the case that it's important that you need to know the cult leader if you're going to make a claim about the group being a cult.
Bear this in mind throughout the conversation, but the point that Bro here is trying to defend is that you could claim a group as a cult even if you don't know who the leader of that cult is. Bear that in mind. This is his initial central point of disagreement.
I mean, like, strictly speaking, I would probably agree. I feel like I think you can probably have cults that are around ideas and stuff, although I don't know of any off the top of my head that exist that way. What are some big cults, I guess, that are generally, like, leaderless?
3 points here. Number one is that I don't know if Destiny realized, but he effectively just conceded the debate. The opponent is arguing that the negation of the proposition that you need to know the leader of Group X if you want to claim that X is a cult is true. If Destiny, strictly speaking, agrees with that statement, then he concedes the truth of that proposition, given that it's the proposition in dispute. That's just to concede the debate. Ignoring the fact that the concession of this proposition was basically just granted, the second problem is that Destiny asked for examples. Now, it seemed as though he was doing this because he wanted to determine the truth value of the proposition in dispute. If he just wanted an illustration, that's fine, but if he was attempting to make a determination, that's fallacious, as the argument in question is about, in principle, what you can know about a cult. Now, what you can know in principle about something isn't going to be judged on whether or not you could find examples of that thing. Third point is that Destiny completely shifted the question. The initial question was whether or not you need to know the cult leader to claim that a group is a cult. But Destiny replies that he doesn't know of any cults that in fact have no leader. But that wasn't what the question was about. The question wasn't about whether or not a cult could have a leader. It was about whether or not you need to know the leader to know that it's a cult. Here, look at this shift.
So it's not the case that it's important that you need to know the cult leader if you're going to make a claim about the group being a cult.
There you go. You don't need to know the leader to claim that the group is nonetheless a cult. What's the reply?
I mean, like, strictly speaking, I would probably agree. I feel like I think you can probably have cults that are around ideas and stuff, although I don't know of any off the top of my head that exist that way. What are some big cults, I guess, that are generally, like, leaderless?
But now he's shifting to whether or not there are cults without leaders, but that wasn't the question. Imagine if I say that you could be somebody's son without knowing your mother, and they respond, well, actually, all sons in fact have mothers. Yeah, we know that. That wasn't the point in dispute. It was about knowledge of the mother, not whether or not the mother exists. In the same way, the debate is about whether or not you have to know the cult leader, not whether or not there is one.
So I do not know any cults that are leaderless, but okay. I would argue I don't need to know an actual real-life cult. I can make an argument that doesn't involve a real-life cult. So just to be clear, were you making that rhetorical point, do you think? I mean, I know you don't have the perfect memory, but...
When you say was I making the rhetorical point, do you mean was I just looking for, like, kind of a snappy response that I wasn't, like, that is not something that I would logically defend to its extreme, or...?
It could be that, or do you seriously think that you need to know the cult leader of a group if you're claiming the group is a cult?
Do you need to know the cult leader as a substitution for, does there need to be a cult leader, or?
If you're going to make a claim, if you're going to say group A is a cult, is it important to know whether that, for you personally, to know whether that group, what the cult leader of that group is?
I'm just making sure I understand. Like, are you saying, like, there's a possibility, or that this has nothing to do with the existence of a cult leader, but it has to do with whether or not every single member knows there's a cult leader?
No, whether or not the truth status of the claim, like this group A is a cult.
Yes.
Whether the person who's making that claim if it's reasonable for them to make that claim when they don't know who the cult leader is.
I feel like you should know that. I guess it's not inconceivable that you could figure out that there is a cult without knowing the leader, maybe, but that seems highly unlikely. I
Okay, so
guess.
that's where we would disagree, because I think that there's a property of the common usage term of cult, that part of that meaning isn't actually going to. There's not going to be a property where like the cult requires a cult leader.
So there's actually no disagreement here, because Destiny had said that it seemed to him that it's possible to know that a group is a cult without knowing the leader, it's just unlikely to know that. Now, the statement Destiny made that it's improbable or difficult to know a cult without knowing the cult leader is perfectly consistent with the statement that the common usage of the word cult includes cults without leaders.
Without knowing the leader, maybe, but that seems highly unlikely. I
Okay,
guess.
so that's where we would disagree, because I think that there's a property. There's not going to be a property where like the cult requires a cult leader.
I don't see the disagreement. It's compatible that it's difficult to find out a group is a cult if you don't know the leader, and for it to be true that the common usage of the word cult allows for cults to be leaderless sometimes.
So, for example, like if we were to have just a hypothetical, if we have a building where there's dead bodies and people worshiping Satan and you have to step over the dead bodies and stuff, I think most people would consider that a cult, even if there's not a leadership structure.
So it looks like what happened was the initial objection that you don't need to know a cult leader to know that a group is nonetheless still a cult was conflated by Destiny for the claim that a cult doesn't need a leader, and now both parties make this mistake and proceed to get distracted debating this irrelevancy.
How would the cult issue new orders to cult members? What would that look like?
Well, that would be a loaded question if there's not a cult leader, but it could be just that they all like read a book or something, and the book, and they worship
Yeah, but
it.
who would
and it's
decide
just,
what the book is?
what's that?
Well, first question would be who would decide what the book is, and then the second question would be would I not just say that the author of that book is then the cult leader?
Well, the book, well, it could have been maybe a former leader that passed away or something like that, or maybe just the group. So human beings are emotional. I mean, we can just enjoy writing or something, and as a group, and then like have this emotional, weird view, bizarre, like strange view or whatever, and then.
Unfortunately, this is all irrelevant to the initial claim that you don't need to know the cult leader to know that a group is still nonetheless a cult. The details of how exactly a leaderless cult operates is strictly irrelevant to that initial claim.
What do you think? I guess what is the definition of cult you're kind of working with?
So I actually don't have a fully fleshed out definition of cult. I don't even think that matters, because I'm not talking about what the definition of I'm not making any claims about what the definition of a cult means, like in general. I'm making a specific claim that it's not the case that the definition contains this property where there must be a cult leader.
No, that wasn't the initial claim. The initial claim was this.
So it's not the case that it's important that you need to know the cult leader if you're going to make a claim about the group being a cult.
One claim is about knowing the cult leader, the other claim is about there having to be a cult leader. I don't know how or why we've got dragged into defending that there has to be one. The initial claim that Destiny had made that was under dispute was that you have to know the cult leader.
Sure, I guess, but however you define cult, I imagine there's going to be some part of this that I'm going to say it's probably necessary to have a cult leader in order to have that cult work.
Oh, okay.
Like my understanding is that cults in general, like most people agree that there is some kind of like ideological conformity that's enforced on the group. There's usually because it changes sometimes to adapt to modern circumstances. You need some kind of system by which to enforce that change, and usually that comes from some kind of leader or leadership structure. That like if you had a group of people whose beliefs kind of changed based on external evidence and everything, then definitionally it wouldn't be a cult. It would just be a group of people that think a certain thing.
Even if the group of people, I guess it's kind of, I'm not gonna be honest, it's kind of hard to track what you're saying, but if even if the group of people are like torturing babies and like worshiping Satan.
Why would that? Is the definition of a cult just people that do bad things?
Well, it could be people with like extreme beliefs, like people that.
Is that a cult? If people with extreme beliefs?
Well, it would be. I mean, I don't have fully fleshed out view, but it would be something similarly to that. I think a lot of people would consider a building where babies are being tortured and people are worshiping Satan to be a cult.
Yeah, but what's the cult part of that?
The cult part of that, I mean, I don't know exactly why people would I don't know exactly why they would say it's a cult, but I would imagine it has something to do with the dead bodies and the extreme beliefs that they have.
I feel like definitionally, I think when people talk about cults, they talk about like a leadership that can issue orders or can be like a source of epistemic truth for a group of people that is resistant to external or outside information that would help those people update their beliefs. So definitionally, that's why I think most people would say that cults require like leaders.
I just think that most people would want a definition of cult that would capture a building full of dead bodies and blood and all that stuff, even if there's not a leadership structure to be a cult. Like most people would want.
They would probably, but what you're talking about is behavior that would be so aberrant from the norm that it seems like there must have been somebody that was probably telling them, right? Like can you conceive of a situation where a bunch of people would come together to go to a building to worship or walk over dead bodies that doesn't get all of this information from a singular leader or a group of leaders?
No, that's a fair point. Like it's hard for me to. I would respond by just saying humans are emotional. We're animals. A lot of
yeah,
people
but emotional and is not random, right? If a bunch of people started to do a particular thing that all seemed like highly like off the norm, why are they all getting where are they getting that information to go do that thing? Generally, it comes from an individual, like a leader, right?
Yeah, well, one thing I will point out that even if it's hard to conceive or whatever, I mean, the hypothetical still remains. Where like if a group were to hypothetically do that, the question is still on the table of whether or not that group is a cult.
So putting aside the fact that this dispute is irrelevant to the initial claim that you can know some group is a cult without knowing the leader of that cult, if we're going to entertain whether or not we could have a cult absent a leader, this is a great point. The point is that if we have a group that has every characteristic of a cult, but they simply don't have a leader, irrespective of how that manages to happen, irrespective of whether or not it actually ever happened, and if we have examples, that would still be a cult. To use an intuition pump to bolster this point, imagine we have a group and we all agree it's a cult. They do crazy rituals, they are immune to counter evidence, they have a tight-knit circle, there's abusive practices, whatever it is that makes a cult, this group has it. But then imagine there's a second group that's perfectly identical to this first group in every respect, other than the fact that they don't have a leader. Irrespective of how this manages to happen, they're identical in every respect, other than the fact that they don't have a leader. Is this second group a cult? To say no would seem absurd. If there's literally no difference other than the fact that one guy is considered leader, but every other practice remains the same, how is it not a cult? It seems entirely arbitrary if it's a necessary requirement of a group that does everything the same, it's a necessary requirement they have a leader of that group in order to make it a cult. That's so arbitrary. It should be the practices they engage in, not whether or not there's a leader that overlooks those practices. That's so arbitrary.
So even if it's hard for me to like imagine that situation or explain it, it's hard for me to imagine how like human body processes food or whatever. But I still know it happens. Or
I mean, it would be like if I was 1,000 feet in the air, and then you're asking like if I'm able to fly, and I say yes because I'm 1,000 feet in the air, and then you ask me how did I get there, and I say I don't know how I got there, and it's hard to think of how I got there. But if I was 1,000 feet in the air, then of my own power, then I'm flying. But like if you don't have the mechanism to get there, that seems kind of strange. Like definitionally, cults are cults because there's usually a group of people that are all doing things that society at large would think is kind of weird. And if society at large thinks the thing is weird, then generally people don't do it. So to get a group of people to do the thing that society doesn't really like usually requires them to all be sourcing some belief or something from a different piece of information or some kind of like different source of truth. And that is usually the cult leader. Like Scientology has a cult leader. ISIS had a leader. Most religious extremist groups have religious leaders. I would say for MAGA, like Donald Trump is the leader. These leadership figures are really important because without a leadership figure, then a bunch of people in a group of people would look around for other sources of truth information, and then they would leave the cult, the group, right?
2 points. First of all, reminder, this is all irrelevant to the initial position that was in dispute, namely that you don't need to know the cult leader to know that a group is still nonetheless a cult. Second, not only is this point that Destiny just made irrelevant to the initial point in question, it's also relevant to the current one in question. The question is not, is there in fact a cult that's leaderless? The question is not, do most actual cults have leaders? The question is not, is it realistic to get or maintain a cult without a leader? The question is purely conceptual. Or if you like definitions, it's a question of definition. Conceptually speaking, or by definition, can a cult be a cult without a leader? Not, is there such a cult? Not, is it practical to get one or maintain such a cult? So yeah, that concludes this little segment here that I want to analyze. Overall, I'd say Destiny took the L. He was definitely overall more confused, made more irrelevant points and distinctions, so yeah.